Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I think we're just waiting for Candace to join us. There
Right.
she is. Good morning, Candace. Good morning, Aaron.
Morning.
All right. Well, I want to be very respectful of everybody's time, so I'd like to start our morning program. Again, good morning to everybody on the phone. I'm Gail Letts, and I welcome you to this week's edition of Let's Talk. Let's Talk is a weekly program that discusses topics of finance, business, career, and health and wellness. It's specifically designed for professional women, but for those men who have joined us this morning, we're pleased to welcome you as well. Our program this morning is focused on the nonprofit community, and we have with us Martha Quinn, who's Executive Director of Development for the Massey Cancer Center, Candace Mraz, President of Mraz & Company and co-founder of Free Horse Arts, and Aaron McClung, Vice President and Senior Philanthropic Specialist at Wells Fargo Private Bank. Our panelists are going to talk about how nonprofits can use these challenging times to create opportunities for funding, including a discussion of the CARES Act and how it impacts nonprofits. Our panelists will talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we have 10 to 20 minutes left for questions and answers. So we will have time for those. If you want to send them in, though, during the program, if you think of something, there is a button on the bottom of your screen that should say questions and answers. You can go ahead, type that in, and then we'll see them at the very end. So at this point, I'd like to turn the program over to Candace Mraz, who is not only our panelist this morning, but one of our moderators. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Gail. Good morning, everyone. Grab your morning beverage and let's talk. Thank you, Martha and Aaron, for joining us this morning as well. For those of you who are listening in, our purpose this morning is just to talk about opportunities that could arise in these challenging times for nonprofits. We have our own experiences and with a lot of these that we wanted to share with you this morning, but we know that we're not the only resources out there. So I encourage you all to take advantage of other webinars and other resources that are out in our community to help nonprofits. But this morning, let's start with the first thing that we think is an opportunity during this time, and that's remaining relevant. So even if your cause is not directly related to COVID, there's plenty of ways to remain relevant. It's important for you to remain relevant during this time. So Aaron, let's chat about that. What are your thoughts?
Sure. Well, I'd like to think that at this point, at the start of this issue, it's mostly health related, right? We were thinking like this is a health issue, and as we get further along, it feels like everyone's related to COVID-19 response right now. So there are a couple organizations that I just went into my email and typed up COVID-19 or coronavirus, and I was amazed with how many things popped up from various organizations, and there are a few that I thought were particularly of note. And I think we might have somebody from the Science Museum on, but I was really impressed with the communication that they were sending. The last time I was at the Science Museum, there were probably hundreds of kids running around. And obviously that's not something that can be done right now, but they're communicating around public health. They're communicating around the environment, providing information on what the environment looks like today with less traffic, cleaner air. They're communicating their mission in a different kind of way, but using the current issues to expand upon that. The Reed Center, which is here in the Richmond area, is a great organization that works one-on-one with individuals that, adults that don't have great literacy skills. So instead of being able to be one-on-one, they've adapted to sending newspapers at home. They're doing more consulting and sending packets out on a weekly basis. So they've had to adapt their complete model from a very intensive one-on-one in-person model to something that they're able to do remotely. But the other issue is it compounds the issue of sort of our digital divide. This coronavirus outbreak really puts a fine point on sort of health disparities. And one of the things, actually, I'm looking over to Martha, I guess she's that direction on the screen, is what's going on in VCU and some of the great work that they're doing around talking about health disparities. Certain pockets of our community obviously don't have access to as great a healthcare. The digital divide helps compound that. But Martha, I was just going to say, what's going on at VCU as far as that kind of work?
Well, thank you so much for pitching that the way you did. I really appreciate it. I'm a part of the Massey Cancer Center, very proudly serving our cancer patients during this time. And we are part of that healthcare response to COVID very directly. But most importantly, we are trying to ensure that our cancer patients continue to receive safe and excellent care. And we have patients who come from all different parts of our socioeconomic situations here in the Richmond community and around the state. We actually are very proud of the fact that we, as one of the leaders in the country, are addressing health disparities around cancer on a normal basis. And we're using this time to ensure that we're communicating through the various channels that we use to make sure that we're using telehealth in more expanded ways. We know that so many of our patients are not coming in for their normal care. Most clinics have closed, any non-essential procedures have closed, but we're using leaning a lot more on our nursing staff. So thank you to all of the nurses out there for your incredible care, and to all of our care providers. But we're really looking at how can we communicate in different ways. And we know that a lot of our households may not have the technology that we're all enjoying this morning. So making sure that we're being very deft about how we communicate and using telephones. I said to Candace earlier this week, getting back to basics is oftentimes what we really have to embrace.
Real quick to add, I was just going to add on real quick when you were mentioning the nurses and doctors. One of the other organizations that I neglected to mention earlier was the YMCA here in Greater Richmond area, providing free childcare for those first responders and those closest to sort of on the medical side of things. So it's a way for an organization that's typically associated with gyms and outreach programs to adapt to providing services for those that when kids are at home and should be in school, being able to adapt real quickly.
Definitely.
Sorry, Candace.
No, it's fine. I completely agree with both of you. It's hard for those of us who, I'm working right now with a high school, a private high school, and it's oftentimes hard to feel like you're not relevant. If you're non quote unquote non-essential. But I think there's definitely different ways to think outside the box and ensure that we are still very important to our community in many other ways, though we're considered quote unquote non-essential. I'm going to move right into the next one, which is I'm going to actually share my screen so that you guys have a little bit of a path to follow us here. The next one we want to talk about was motivating your staff, especially now most of our staff is remote now. And Martha, you had some good anecdotes for us as far as what you guys are doing over there at Massey. You want to share?
I'd be happy to. And I know some of my staff are on today, so thank you all, because this is really a team effort. I think that in these times, a lot of us really quickly had to move into a situation where we are now using this new technology, and the only way we're able to see each other is when we're looking at each other on computer screens. We've joked about the fact that maybe we don't have to wear high heels or makeup anymore to work, since we've all seen each other in varying stages of just to repair. And we're getting to know each other's kids and families and dogs and cats and environments. So I think that part of that has been really heartwarming to be able to embrace. But I think that one of the things that struck me from the very beginning is it's really critical to make it clear that we still have a plan. And I communicated with my team early on that obviously we have a long-term plan. Our plan is that we want to remain one of the top 3 charities of choice in the audiences and homes that we serve here in the Richmond and surrounding communities. But our immediate plan was also that we needed to take care of each other. We needed to be authentic. We needed to be thinking about our care providers and our teams. And we wanted to communicate with our donors. And so making a clear plan, I think, was really critical. And we also realized that we were going to use this time to revisit things, which I know we'll talk about in a bit. But I think one of the best parts of being motivating, I hope it's been motivating, is my team has been sending almost daily communications where we just kind of start an email chain, and we've shared everything from pictures of our command centers to favorite stories that we're finding, even memes that we're seeing on Facebook, Or some days, one of my colleagues, actually, Michelle Adcock, she sent one morning, what is she grateful for? And that really spawned a beautiful chain of communications throughout the day that everybody was able to embrace. And I think that it's also important to be really understanding. There are a lot of different challenges that everyone is facing right now. So I think that being understanding and being authentic in these moments are really critical. And I hope everybody's embracing that.
Yeah, I'm finding that I'm doing more check-ins on everyone's health and wellness, both mental health and physical wellness, than we ever have before. And I think that's something we severely take for granted with one another, especially in the nonprofit industry. We're running at all speeds and catching plates and so forth. And oftentimes our mental health and physical wellness are taken for granted. So I found that this has been a unique time, though unprecedented, a unique time to check in with our staff and make sure that that they're doing well. And homeschooling has been a challenge for many, I'm sure. So juggling that and having the empathy for others as we go through it is critical. Aaron, did you have any thoughts on that as well?
I had the opportunity to work with some remote staff, or I was remote managing some staff a couple of years ago. So it's interesting. Building relationships in person and then maintaining those at a distance are very different things. One thing I wanted to offer up, even though I think there's some gender differences that kind of come into play when talking about this. I noticed this through my wife in her work. I think guys tend to be a little more solitary. And I think during this kind of disruption, there's a loneliness element that may be more exacerbated among males in the population, regardless of your work or whatever. So that's one thing I just kind of noticed. I've been trying to be very intentional about. We were joking the other day about happy hours through Zoom or Skype or FaceTime or whatever. So trying to do that. But I feel like for those that have males in their organization on staff, it's just me as a guy talking here. I feel like it's probably a bigger issue for men to be kind of alone or at home by themselves during this time than maybe women.
True that. Good point. So what about involving your board? Speaking of happy hours, Aaron, you had some great thoughts the other day about what extent boards really should look at being strategic versus tactical at this time.
Yeah, I think it really runs the gamut. Everybody here who's worked with boards, been on a board, really knows it runs the gamut. Was the first thing that went through your mind was this a freak out kind of moment, or did you already have a playbook, or at least conceived that this kind of thing might happen? What was the state of your finances in your organization? What kind of reserves did you have, if any? What's your fundraising plan? How is that adapted? But first and foremost, has your mission changed? Has the mission of your organization changed, or are you just able to adapt slightly? And I think each organization has to go through that process of figuring out, are they in the same kind of business today as they were 2-3 months ago? And if that's different, then that takes on a whole new issues. Is the board you have today the board you need for a dynamic, ever-changing environment? Or are they more of a static, approve the budget, everybody, there's no discussion, there's no dissent, there's no conversation kind of thing. So not to criticize any method of doing things, but I think this is a really unique opportunity to look at revisiting a lot of those kinds of things. What I would say as far as strategic versus tactical, sometimes boards are super large, and the executive committee is really the place where a lot of these quick decisions get made. So I would say if you don't have the opportunity to engage the entire board, at least consider setting up a weekly or very regularly scheduled conference call, whether it's Zoom or something where you can actually see the folks on a periodic basis to kind of walk through, like what Martha was saying, some of the more human elements of just working in an organization that might be going through a huge shift. Having the board appreciate that, having them understand that and humanize the staff and the mission of the organization, and then be able to make real-time decisions. I think for those that were working during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, that was sort of a dry run, if you will, for where we are right now. That period of time, 18, 24 months, seemed like forever. But what we've done from an economic standpoint is taken that entire 2-year period and shortened it to the last 3 months, 2-3 months. So for those board members and organizations that kind of can look back to what they did in 2008, 2009, use that as a frame of reference to how to work with your organization today, particularly from a financial standpoint. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces out there. We're going to talk about the CARES Act later, but use that as a guide for how to respond this time around.
This is Gail. If I can add a comment along the lines, it's interesting. I'm on several boards, and it's been interesting how different each of the boards is handling this. For some of the boards that are launched an aggressive strategic plan, if they're not communicating with their board about what is going on a regular basis, right now we're all being inundated with meeting invites, Zoom invites, Google Hangouts, emails. It seems like our email boxes are exploding. So some people are shying away from communicating. I think that particularly in the nonprofit community that is so reliant on the support of the community, it is really important for that executive director or director of development to be communicating with the population that it serves and its board and its donors, letting them know what is going on. It's too easy to get lost in the background if that's not happening. And I know I have really appreciated, again, this one board that I'm serving that just launched a major strategic initiative, a month before COVID exploded, and was worried about what is that going to mean as far as a setback, and to be able to get those emails every single week on here's the status of where we are, this is what's going on, here's how the timeline has changed. Because if you're serving on a board, you're known in the community as the representative of that board. And when people see you, and if there is something very strategic that's very public, they're going to want to ask those questions. So inform your board. That would be my suggestion.
Thanks, Gail. Another thought that we had, that we shared, Martha, you shared with us, is using this time to update your communications and crisis management plans. I mean, this is obviously a time too to get your board involved in this. This is closely tied to leadership. Martha, share your thoughts about using this time wisely to update these plans, and how many of us didn't even have one. You thought maybe after 9/11 we would have created some crisis management plans, but many of us didn't. And so we're actually having to use this time to create a plan in real time. But Martha, you had some great anecdotes about how this is really closely tied to leadership, and we can use this sort of quote unquote downtime to update our communication and crisis plans.
Well, and I want to be clear that I'm not the director of communications. So I think that that's important to note. But obviously, those of us who are leaders in the not-for-profit arena, we are a critical component of these kind of plans. I think that a lot of us in those first 2 weeks in particular, my observation was that communication was coming from a variety of sources, and it was streaming fast and it was changing quickly. So only in the world that I sort of could have impact on did I try to collect and gather information such that we could be very clear in what we were communicating. And in particular, it references what Gail and Aaron were just saying. Communicating to our board became one of the big issues for us. We have a relatively new director of our cancer center. And, we had a plan to roll him out into the community with a lot of face-to-face and group meetings over this first 9 months of the year. And we had to pivot that and figure out how we were going to make sure that Dr. Nguyen was still being introduced to critical members of our community and group gatherings without having the ability to be face-to-face with one another. So we did try to embrace that. And I was really grateful that Dr. Nguyen welcomed having a weekly phone call with the executive leadership of our board and a couple of other volunteers. And in that first week, he said, I'm deputizing you all as members of our community to share the information that's happening at Massey. That's exactly what Gail just referenced. Because we are only so many people, and particularly right now as we're sitting in our dining rooms or offices and we're trying to communicate, we know that friends and family who are being affected by cancer or who just want to know what's happening at VCU Health, they're going to be calling members of our board. And so it was really critical for them to feel confident and assured that they could share the information. So Dr. Wynn's now having a weekly call and sharing out information. And last week we actually did a webinar with our board where we had, I think, 6 other care providers, which was really amazing because these are the people who are on the front line who joined us for about 35 minutes and talked about exactly what is happening and changing, everything from how you valet park your car to how many visitors our cancer patients can have and whether or not you should still come in and get your infusions and how we can address the concerns our cancer patients in particular have. But then Dr. Wynn's also opening it up and we're all trying to learn what is VCU Health doing so that we can all help all the members of our care provision team that are addressing the COVID crisis in addition to cancer care.
I also think too, you know, a lot of nonprofits, I've spoken with a lot of colleagues in the community, you know, everyone's either on, you know, doing furloughs or they're doing cutbacks and so forth. And I caution in your crisis management plans to overlook your development teams, especially those of you who are joining us that are on boards and executive directors. You know, your development officers are really, really your most critical staff during this time. Oftentimes we think of accounting and you know, finance and keep things moving and so forth, but your development officers are really the ones that are the front line, especially during a crisis. So I caution you as you think through your plan to really think hard about what staff are quote unquote considered essential to your team, and make sure you don't overlook your development staff. That leads into practicing stewardship, which is we could probably talk about for about 30 minutes. This is a real hot one for me. I'm always you know, pushing stewardship. You know, you cannot make an ask for any funds whatsoever if you're not stewarding your donors. And you certainly can't raise money if you're not asking. So stewardship's a big one. And Martha, we had a great conversation about just simply taking this time using your board and your staff members and your executive directors and so forth to just say thank you right now. So you want to share more about this opportunity?
I would love to. Anybody who knows me knows that for 20 years, I have gone back to my main mantra. My mantra throughout my career has been chase the money and say thank you. And so when we first started into this crisis, I said, let's flip it. We're going to say thank you, say thank you, say thank you, because eventually we will be chasing the money again. We are all going to get back to normal. We might slightly revisit what normal is, but we are going to overcome this. And so saying thank you, I think, is about going back to basics. When we were all fleeing our offices and grabbing things that we didn't even know what we'd be working with, I grabbed a whole stack of stamps and note cards. And I'm a big believer in handwritten thank you notes. And right now I'm just writing thank you notes. I mean, just notes, you know, touching base with people. You know, I might be reaching people by the phone. I am trying to use FaceTime with those individuals who I think are comfortable with it, sending text messages. We got creative, actually. We just found a new way, a Kudo board, where the whole team can go on board and send thank you cards. So yesterday we used it for the first time with one of our board members, and everyone could pick a little design, and this individual got an email with all these different messages. So I think that going back to the basics is never going to hurt you. The other piece that we've said is, as we have the time right now, a lot of our researchers, frankly, their laboratories have had to be put on hold. And if they're not a frontline fundraiser, it doesn't mean they don't have nothing to do. Don't get me wrong. But we know that frequently we're trying to ask them to provide us with updates on what they have accomplished using the philanthropic dollars that have been invested in them over the last year or 8 months, whatever it's been. So we're taking this time to reach out to them and really learn, what are they doing? What have they accomplished thus far? And going ahead and starting to write some of the stewardship reports that typically we do in the fall with our endowment reports. But we have the time, there's not any more research that's going to happen in this fiscal year, at least. So let's gather this information, and how much more robust maybe will that be? And I think as a part of that, we're making sure we're sharing what we're gathering across our team so that everybody has content to be able to write in those notes or to share on those phone calls and talk about the accomplishments of our incredible team.
That's a great point. Martha, often most nonprofits have separate staff members, if you will. Development is always seen, or executive directors of board always seem to be separate from your programmatic staff. Your real boots on the ground, doing the work for good kind of staff. And this is an awesome opportunity for our development staff to really engage with our programmatic staff that are either, their jobs are sort of, stale right now, if you will, because they can't be out in the community, but have never really been involved in the development aspects of stewarding our constituencies. And so it's a great time to reach across that line to your programmatic staff to say, hey, come help me out with reaching out to some of these donors. We just did this not too long ago with St. Margaret's. We at St. Margaret's School in Tappahannock, we've got our advancement chair as well as a couple staff members that are helping us reach out to our planned giving donors. And planned giving donors are often, they give their legacy gift and they don't hear from the organization very much. So this has been an awesome opportunity for our staff as well as our advancement chair as a volunteer to make the phone calls just to say, hey, how are you doing? How are you? The other thing that came up this week too is we often rely on our small businesses to sponsor our programs and we take from them, but this is an extreme opportunity to reach out to your businesses that have been supporting you loyally for years and years and reach back out to them to say, I'm not asking you for any money. I'm here to serve you. How, you've been of service to us for so long by funding our organization. What can we do to serve you? Could we, if you can put a link up to their site, these small businesses are really struggling. So if there's ways that we can connect with them to help actually flip the table and serve them in some way, that will go a long way down the road because that small business is going to know that you reached out and tried to help them support their business in any possible way during this time. Aaron, did you have a thought? I thought I saw your.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, who are your Mark Smiths? I mean, he's obviously a local businessman who's supporting so many different organizations and, everyone's got one, whether they're as public or not. How do you do that? Back to what Gail was mentioning earlier about some of this communication around boards. And she and I were both on the Richmond Symphony board during the sort of financial crisis. And one of the things I really appreciate about the executive director there, David Fisk, is every Friday we got an email about what happened that week. And there was great data, great anecdotes, but every time I got that, I read it religiously, but always take away a nugget that I would be able to share the following week with whoever I was interacting with. And I think, Candace, you were talking earlier about you really involving your development staff who have periodic communications with donors, even when they're not in their offices or at home. Sharing that key nuggets of insights on a periodic weekly basis or whatever your frequency is going to go so far. One other thing we're talking about, this is more on the financial side of things, is people have time to read printed materials. So as Martha was talking about writing thank you notes, if you've got some materials that you thought were going to be just for people who are walking in to pick up and take away, think about mailing those out. I mean, I think we're inundated with emails and everything else, but a hard copy can go a long way during this time when people are at home and have probably more time to consume that kind of media.
Definitely. Another thought is using social media platforms now more than ever. So many of us have been afraid of I don't know how to use Facebook or Instagram, but really now that's our greatest strength and our greatest way to communicate. So Martha, why don't you share a few things? You had some really this is kind of going back to your being in the top 3, social media is definitely a way to get our message out there and the work that we're doing in the community, but not just push, give. There's other ways to really be relevant when social media right now.
Well, I totally agree. And I will admit, I actually fell into the world of TikTok over the weekend. I still don't exactly understand what it is, but I consider myself a little bit of a Luddite. So if I can sit and pay attention to this, I swear anybody can figure this out. And tonight I'm hosting my neighborhood book club on Zoom. So we'll see how that goes. But I think that this is definitely the time to think about what are the creative ways that you can use your social media. Being in healthcare, I can lean on the incredible opportunity to recognize our heroes, which are obviously our care providers right now. I really am so proud. The Massey Alliance actually created a beautiful, beautiful video saying thank you to our care providers and offering encouragement to our cancer patients who are in the hospital. Our cancer patients in the hospital can't have visitors right now. And so if you go to my LinkedIn page, or I think it's on multiple social media through Massey Cancer Center, you can see that. And they created it on their own. So I think one of the things that I've really been pushing for is let's not worry about perfection right now. We have recorded a video. I went in and recorded a video of Dr. Nguyen in his office. I am not a fancy production person. We had one of our members of our communications team who edited that video, and we got it out to our board members. The MCV Foundation has partnered with us to do a couple of videos. One of my colleagues actually interviewed one of our care providers who actually works in health disparities, because there's an app that we have that we're encouraging people to put data on their phones. And we know people are at home right now. So let's point them to downloading an app, giving them very clear instructions, and they can contribute to data that's being collected from Virginians all over the state to help us understand more about the ways to prevent and care for treatment of cancer. So using these kind of things, we're just kind of figuring it out. It's amazing. My 20-year-old nieces remind me all the time, just go on YouTube, Aunt Martha, and you can find how to do it. So don't be afraid. I really think that using various forms of social media, I see a lot of people on LinkedIn right now. Some people might have thought LinkedIn died a couple of years ago. It has not. A lot of professionals are using it. So those of us in the not-for-profit world, we need to make sure we're present on LinkedIn. And we had an announcement of one of our doctors who's joined our leadership team yesterday. And I saw one of my staff members, Chris Marin, he actually posted that last night on LinkedIn. And I was able to like it. Those are the things that we need to keep reminding people that our mission continues. Cancer is still happening, even as this pandemic is happening. And our leadership is responding to the cancer treatments and disease alongside of helping other care providers respond to this virus.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sorry, I have a pause because I'm trying to navigate. I'm the host and navigating everything at the same time. Next, we wanted to chat about revisiting strategies and rethinking old habits. We had a question that was just shared with us from one of our attendees, Trina. She said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on organizational balance. How do we guide nonprofits regarding an emphasis on managing this crisis in the present while also cultivating long-term strategic steps, even if it's in a small scale for now? And Aaron, we had some conversation about this in revisiting your strategies and rethinking your old habits. And, as we're trying to work through this crisis, but also this is an opportunity to, look at our strategic plans long-term, what's working, what's not, what are some practices that we're doing well, and not at the same time juggling the plates of this ever-evolving daily crisis.
Right, absolutely. And I think this is where we've got to separate out feeling and facts and use data to help inform what we're going to be doing next. I've been in a lot of conversations with the Richmond Area Funders Group about not only just dealing with the current crisis, but also what's going on for the medium term, what's going on for the long term. The impacts of what we're going through right now are not going to go away when stimulus checks hit. It's going to take months, if not years, probably years, to kind of digest where we've been. So I would say this is a great time to think about using ad hoc committees. Who are your futurists? Who are the people on your board or staff that are always the idea folks? What's coming around the corner? Have you thought about this? Those folks may feel like they're not able to do much when it requires tactical day-to-day decision-making or participate in that kind of conversation. So I would say give those folks an audience, an opportunity to craft a 6 months from now plan or a year from now plan. I think that's an opportunity for both you to empower more people in ways that they feel like they have an opportunity to give. So what are the issues that have been unearthed during this crisis for your organization or for populations that your organization is attempting to serve? Who are the allies in the nonprofit community that you can collaborate with? And let's think collaboratively around how we can address some of these, whether it's disparities, just lack of access to resources, whatever's been triggered during this crisis gets amplified. So kind of really drawing our attention to that gives us an opportunity to kind of help take your organization or a part of your organization to focus on that in the medium to long term. So find those voices in your organization who are keenly interested in that and put them to work working on maybe a long range plan or a pivot from your current strategic plan. We have all been on boards and organizations where there's a strategic plan and then there's the mid-campaign pivot. With my first fundraising job, Martha and I were working together at Virginia Tech, and the president at the time, Charles Steger, said, Aaron, a strategic plan is just a nice way to put a package around something that you should be doing anyway. So it's kind of like, what your mission is, what your organization needs to do. Use this opportunity to empower those voices. And let's rethink what we've been doing for 20 years. Have we always had the event at the same time? Are we getting the same results? What's the point of all this? I think this is a good time to ask us those questions. I was on a bunch of calls in the past couple of weeks with executive directors and clients who have canceled events for the spring and they've already rebooked them for the fall. So I feel like sometime in September and October, I'll be out 6 nights a week at different events. But the first question is, what's the point of all this? I know, Martha, you guys do a lot of events. What's kind of going on with Massey and VCU in general around their events?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure when we're going to be able to gather in large groups. I don't mean to say that to alarm anyone, but I'm not really confident about the events being rescheduled in the fall. So I've actually asked a group of my team to create an event evaluation task force. This is just a small part of what your bigger vision you're talking about, Aaron. But we are actually asking exactly that question. What's the point of the 3 or 4 primary signature events that our team hosts? Not talking about community-based events that so many of our kind members of the community host for us, but really trying to understand what are the goals? Why do we host these? What's the audience? Is it about pipeline building? How do we align these events with our larger strategic plan, which is about doubling philanthropy, because we know the budget that Dr. Wynn needs to run a comprehensive cancer center. So we're trying to back ourselves into that. And after we do an internal evaluation, we're going to turn to some of those exec leaders on our board because we really value their input. We know that members of our community have been so dedicated to a lot of our wonderful events, and there's a lot of history and a lot of devotion, and we don't want to overlook that, but we also want them to understand the business reasons and the mission-oriented reasons if we do pivot anything. And so ultimately the board will be involved in our decision-making. And I think that that's a really important thing to do right now because frankly, we have the time. So let's use this time wisely.
Aaron, you had mentioned collaboration a few minutes ago, and that was something that stood out for me is, we often get very siloed and into our own space and our own shops, but we talk about how we as organizations collaborate with other organizations, but we get so busy, we actually don't do that. And so this is a critical opportunity here during this time to be able to reach out to like-minded organizations and start sharing your data, start sharing your inputs and be able to look at each other and say, look, we're kind of doing the same thing in the community. How could we better work together? Build those strategies now so that when we are able to go back out into the community, you have like-minded organizations that you are actually truly collaborating with, not just saying you wish you could.
Absolutely. I'm not sure who has the quote, but it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. Probably the biggest organization that is not health specific related that's kind of doing the most in this time right now is Feed More, right? I mean, they're taking on the mantle of feeding kids who are at home and don't have access to great food beyond their normal mission. And that came out of a collaboration 15 years ago amongst a number of medium-sized nonprofits to pull those all together under the heading of Feed More. And it's a fantastic story, but it was one born out of boards getting together and saying, is there a better way we can do this? One of the hats I wear for Wells Fargo is overseeing where trusts and foundations where the bank is a corporate trustee. So I see hundreds of applications from nonprofits for support from these various trusts. And in looking across the spectrum, there's a lot of organizations that maybe not doing the same thing, but are aligned enough that they can consider being strategic partners or allies or whatever the construct is. Let's look for ways to share resources. One of the things that under the heading of sustainability that we did at the University of Richmond a couple of years ago was set up an office of sustainability. So instead of every single office ordering supplies, we had a communal supply closet. So there's a lot of, it sounds silly, but if your organization's spending 5% of its budget on supplies, why not look to collaborate with others that in ways that you can leverage each other to share resources, find sort of the low-hanging fruit, the easy opportunities to collaborate, maybe share expenses, things like that during this time. And I think your boards will really appreciate moving in that direction. 2008, 2009, I was kind of kicking myself for not having a M&A practice, a mergers and acquisitions practice in nonprofits. If it was profitable, that would be a great thing to do. I'm not suggesting we just need to eliminate nonprofits, but where are there opportunities to collaborate? I think funders and boards really appreciate kind of leaning into that.
That's a good segue into investing into new technology, Aaron, as another opportunity. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think of all the conversations I've had, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening in who, viewed this pivot. Some may have had an easier time pivoting to work from home using technology, integrating with their legacy systems. In other words, others not so much. And I think it really exacerbates the challenges across, business, nonprofit, individuals. But I know in a lot of organizations, there's a person in charge of technology and they're in a stovepipe, like a lot of other entities. So this could be a great opportunity to bring that person into the fold. It's part at the C-suite level, and then fully integrate that technology into every aspect of any kind of organizational decision making. So whether that's finance, whether that's development, communications, programs, what is the technological component of this? Have we budgeted appropriately? What happens if? That's, again, another area to share resources, opportunities. There's a lot of tools out there that I'm not anywhere, expert to talk about, but this is something that within financial services we're looking at, within nonprofits. I know, most of the providers have, the CRM systems are remote, but beyond that, Martha was talking about doing a video. What are the things, what are the opportunities for your organization to capture things using different forms of technology and then get that out to your audience?
Thanks, Aaron. So lastly, we wanted to chat, since we have your full attention, Aaron, before we lose you at 10 o'clock, we wanted to talk to the expert about utilizing the new federal laws, specifically the CARES Act. I am inundated, and I'm sure all of you are, with emails from organizations, from, you name it. I get an email every day with resources on how you can use, the advantages of the CARES Act. If you could kind of walk us through that a little bit in ways that nonprofits specifically can utilize these new laws, Aaron, and you got 3 minutes. So
Break it out. I'll break it out in three sections. One, the organizational finance piece. Two, fundraising as it relates to fundraising. And then three, just in the grand scheme of things related to, I'll call it plan giving. So on the finance side, I think it was a 349 billion was allocated towards PPP, Paycheck Protection Act. We fully expect that's going to be drawn down fully in this week. For those organizations that are listing in that have not already applied, there are a lot of conversations around in Congress and in Washington around adding maybe $250 billion to that. So if you've not already picked up the phone or sent an email to your banker or your financial institution, do so today, just to get in the queue. Just to say there was a little bit of a fumble from the rapidity of this whole thing really is challenging to implement this kind of a program, regardless of how good your organization is. So the handoff from the SBA to all the thousands of financial partners out there really could have been done better. But speaking on for just Wells Fargo, we had an initial $10 billion that were tapped immediately. We were prioritizing nonprofits and employers under 50. That's now, we've had our asset cap lifted, so we're actually processing around 400,000 applications this week, which is pretty crazy. That's coming in on the heels of tapping $70 billion in increased lines of credit in February and early March. So financially, the opportunity to get that loan and then have it turn into a grant is required organizations to keep their organizations and staff through June 30th. I think this is going to be, there's going to be more information to come there. So just stay tuned and be in touch with your financial partner. From a fundraising standpoint, the 2017 Tax Act really, I think, did a disservice to a lot of individual, I'll call them mid-level donors in terms of deductibility. I work with a lot of our individual clients, I'll call it in the high net worth, ultra high net worth space that are already giving away lots of money. They're using private foundations, donor advised funds, that sort of thing. What you need to know is right now there's in 2020 a $300 above the line tax deduction just for cash. That's not a lot of money, so I don't want to focus too much on that. But the key is for organizations, and you know who your donors are that are giving, let's call it beyond their means, the ones that are giving gifts beyond what their income may suggest they can do. I would go back to these folks right now and say this year in 2020, you have the ability to donate up to 100% of your adjusted gross income and be able to fully deduct that. Historically, in the last year, that was 60% for cash and 30% for securities. So this year, there's a unique opportunity for people that have plenty of resources, perhaps not a huge income, but are very philanthropic to target those folks specifically. They'll appreciate that communication. So that's something to consider. The other piece is if your donor base looks like most of America and it skews on the older side, this year for 2020, there is no required minimum distribution for IRAs. So if you've got $1 million IRA, you're 70 and a half, or now, excuse me, 72, there's no required distribution this year. However, individuals can still contribute up to $100,000 through their IRA. So that is still an opportunity for folks. And this requires you to really have a good understanding of your donor base. But that's something I would talk about. We mentioned LinkedIn. About a month ago, I posted an article on why non-cash gifts are going to be important more than ever this year. Here's why. Assets are depressed. People are concerned about, the stock markets being down. We've risen off the bottom, but I think there's a lot more pain and suffering to go. People who have cash are kind of afraid to know what to do with it. So people who have non-cash assets, I'm speaking specifically around real estate or business interest. If you had somebody who's going to sell their business this year, or they've got some real estate that's not producing any income or rental property or whatever it is, be thoughtful and do some homework on ways to accept those kind of gifts if you don't already. If you don't have the opportunity or ability to take those gifts directly, reach out to an intermediary like a donor advised fund, a community foundation, or whatever to help you navigate that process. This is a way for donors to feel like they're making a huge contribution, which they are, in a different kind of way that doesn't come out of the checking account or their stock portfolio. So in times like this, it's good to bone up on different ways to give. And I think for probably at the top end of the spectrum, this is a unique opportunity for folks to do that. So that's kind of PPP and opportunities related to that. Now, I suspect that there's going to be more happening later this year that may change sort of the methodology or what could happen. But those are some things that I would be mindful of. And like I said, just to recap, if your finance team has not already spoken to your bank, do so around PPP. But furthermore, I think this gives us an opportunity to rethink what financial viability looks like, whether you have a reserve fund, an endowment, what's your spending policy. That has nothing to do with PPP, but that's just normal organizational governance kinds of things that I would implore boards and staff to take a look at now so that you remember what things were like today so that 5 years from now, you're prepared for whatever's next.
That's extremely helpful, Aaron. Thank you very, very much. I may have to get on the phone with you more often and have you help me navigate this. I want to thank all of you very much for joining us. Gail, I'm going to turn it back over to you, but wanted to, just tell our attendees, keep doing the good work. Your community needs you badly. It's fearful. It's a hard time to think about, oh, well, we're a non-essential organization, but you are extremely essential. So thank you all very much for being with us, and Martha and Aaron, thank you for joining us. Gail, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Candace, and to Martha and to Aaron and to Candace, thank you so much for some great comments. I was taking some notes and I just wanted to kind of go through them very quickly. First of all, don't forget the men. And Aaron, that was such an important point for us. My guess is that nearly everybody on the phone this morning is female because that's who we basically marketed the program to. Sure. But we forget of those gender differences. And you're so right. And it was your comment about, men have a tendency to be a little bit more withdrawn and a little bit more isolationist versus we women who do thrive on relationship and conversation. So I thought that was really important. So thank you so much for saying that. Martha, your comment about kudo boards, I never heard about that one. So that's something I really want to go out and research. I love the comment about learning how to leverage talent, reach across the lines. And I know, again, Candace and I are both doing some work at St. Margaret's, and we're doing quite a bit of that as we speak now. I love the comment about making sure to recognize small businesses. And the fact that small businesses have supported our nonprofits for so many years and have done such good work. And if we can find a way to support them during these challenges, I think it's important to do so. We talked about communicating to the board frequently. My favorite, don't be afraid of technology. I'm the older people on this call today. And it has been a lot of fun learning how to use some of this stuff and not being afraid of it. One of the things that I'm personally doing is, since we're doing these Zoom programs, is I have been dialing into other Zoom presentations to see what's working, what's not, what interests me, how is it presented, what's the format, what are the backgrounds, what makes sense. And that is really important, I think, to do that and to find one piece of technology that you're kind of interested in and make that a passion during this time period to learn more about that. And Martha, congratulations on TikTok. I haven't done that one yet. Evaluating your events, important. Looking for ways to collaborate, the new normal. How can we be better together? Where can we share resources? How can we make this work and learn from it? Tons of information on the CARES Act and the implications. So I think that was really important. I saw Trina had sent a little comment a second ago saying thank you for this information. Do we have any other questions at this point in time? All right, well, being mindful of the time, we are almost up at the 10 o'clock hour. To all of our listeners, the session has been recorded, and information on how to access the recording will be sent as a follow-up. If you want to share the information with friends, please feel free to do so. Next week on April 15th, our guest is going to be Linda Nash, who is CEO and founder of Welcome MD. Linda is a serial entrepreneur who has successfully launched 4 companies. Linda's going to talk about Welcome MD, which is a concierge health system, how Welcome MD is managing through COVID, and how Linda, as a successful female founder, is managing those challenges. We'd also be very interested in hearing suggestions for topics that you would like us to present to you through Zoom. We've got a great network of people throughout all of Mid-Atlantic, and we're just excited to be able to feature them and to call them our partners. So again, to Martha and to Aaron and to Candace, a very, very special thank you. So in closing, I don't see any questions. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us this morning. I hope you'll join us next week, but please stay healthy and stay safe. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.